All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to IGTV. Here's Mark Capers, and Mark's kind of recovering from a cold, so put up with Mark. Hey, listen, Mark, we all go through it, understand, all right, and do the best you can. If you got to suck down some water or something like that, go right ahead, all right? Here we go on a wireless security primer. Go
Thanks,
ahead, Mark.
Joe. This morning on Practical InfoSec, I thought I'd do a basic primer on wireless network security and some mobile endpoint considerations. Um, since wireless is pretty ubiquitous and it's everywhere, and our workforces are more mobile, as well as wireless is a great way to deliver services within an organization, probably need to look at how you're doing it. I'm going to talk about two categories of wireless use, and that's the employee mobile data, and that's employees and mobile devices coming in from non-trusted networks. That's public wireless access points or other service providers, or a lot of us do telecommuting and home commuting. So home network access points are an entryway into your organization that you need to think about. As well as many companies have been deploying wireless for quite some time to deliver common office environment services, as well as doing different types of manufacturing floor and other places where wireless makes sense for them. So to hop in, talking about the employee mobile data via non-trusted networks first, where you should start, make sure that you have a set of policies and standards that apply to both the end node, that's a user's machine, and the user's behavior when accessing your organization from a non-trusted environment, so that your security policy binds their behavior and binds the hardware and software that you're using out there when it's out of your physical control. So ask yourself a few of the following questions. Do you allow non-standard platforms to access your organization's resource? That is, does your home employees, can your employees get any mobile phone they want? Can your employees use their home computer to get their corporate email or log on to corporate applications? Do you require the same level of authentication from non-trusted networks and environments that you do within your own shop? Shouldn't that be a little higher? In most cases, it ought to. Do you require minimum router and wireless access point configurations for your telecommuting and home office users? And does any of the use of wireless by mobile users have any impact on your compliance with regulatory regimes? If you have issues with Sarbanes-Oxley, if you have issues with PCI, you got to understand where that data is going. And if it's going out to an end node on a non-trusted network, you might find yourself in a bit of trouble. So you need to pay attention to those things. Some considerations for home office wireless. I mean, this is becoming big because we all have our little D-Link and Linksys routers sitting in our attic, providing us, network access throughout our homes. And as homes get smarter and more network, chances are they're going to be accessing your organization's network from these places, off hours or even as part of their daily telecommute. So make sure that any access to the organization's network uses standard remote access authentication. Whatever you're currently doing, you need to expand it and make sure it's up to your spec. Home wireless infrastructures, make sure the device provide access to, if they're providing access to a trusted network. If you get a home user with a COE laptop and he's going over a wireless, you're probably going to want to make sure that your users do some basic things around setting up their wireless networks. And I mean, you could make it part of your policy, and you can give them guidelines and guidance how to do this. And just, it's basically things like making sure you do pre-shared keys, use WPA or EAP or PEAP. Make sure that when you do complex shared secret keys, it's complex and try to use 20 characters or better. Again, in this area, passphrases are great. And, I'm a firm advocate for very lengthy passwords using passphrases. So you can say, hey, red house 4 on left with kids 3-wheel and driveway is a pretty good shared key if you make the characters complex. Make sure they disable the broadcast to your SSID. We're also going to cover this in your enterprise access points. Make sure you change the default login and passwords. Again, all these things coming out of the box typically have your own default configurations. So you need to make sure that, like everything else that we do in IT, if it comes with a default setting, change it. Comes with a default password, change it. Make sure that, if it's possible, try to get them to manage that access point with wired connections only. If people can manage your wireless router from the wireless networks, that means anybody driving by could have access to that configuration. If you require a hardwired connection, you're a little bit better off in that respect. And also, if there's a small number of nodes, have them manage and maintain a MAC address list so that it restricts who logs in from where and machine type. Mobile endpoint configurations, pardon me. Require laptops, mobile devices, smartphones to use encryption for data at rest. If you're pushing data out there and it's going to sit on a laptop or a mobile device like a smartphone or PDA, make sure you use encryption if it's available. Try to select devices that support encryption. Most of these things do now. Require time screen lock and a PIN password to unlock, and set it at a reasonable time. Make sure that you have remote wipe enabled. Use VPN clients where possible, or HTTPS where possible. And again, taking this back into the infrastructure for a minute, as you're developing new enterprise applications, consider using, strictly HTTPS or Citrix type, or, kind of follow the old mainframe model. If you're using that PDA as merely a terminal and you can secure the terminal traffic back and forth to that enterprise application, that data is going to stay on the application and back in the data center where it belongs, and you don't have to worry about data wandering off to unsecured endpoints. Or, again, as Al Berg showed us a few weeks ago on his hack report, Apple iPhones, if I have physical control of the iPhone and I know what I'm doing, I can get those cached passwords in about 6 minutes. So if you have sensitive data that's sitting on these mobile devices, if somebody is targeting your network or targeting your employees, they can get it. Excuse me. Moving on to the enterprise, following that note, have an enterprise risk analysis decision process for how and where you're going to use your network or wireless access points. Excuse me. Have a standard set of approved wireless hardware and configurations so that you know what kind of kit you're building, and you can kind of control that as you put it out into your offices and remote locations. So you want to maintain control of that. Again, the architecture considerations are, if you do the planning up front and you do the process work and the heavy lifting up front, it makes it easier to manage and control later on. So have an overall architecture. Make sure that you have a process to determine the location of your WLAN networks in response to your requirements. Understand your requirements and why you're doing wireless access points, and make sure that, that lines up with your enterprise risk. Think about how you're going to do authentication and access over that wireless. Do you want to actually require anybody who's even on a trusted wireless to use VPN for certain critical applications, or possibly everything? Take into account the authentication and encryption schemes that you're going to use. Physical security of the wireless access points are also pretty critical. Again, if you have physical control of the device, it's hackable, and hackable a lot quickly than other means. So make sure that you secure and have standards around securing wireless access points. If they're in data closets, make sure that you put in some lock boxes if they're not secured, or if you can actually physically segregate the network segments, you may want to consider doing that, so that if somebody gets to the wireless access point, they don't have access to a span port on a corporate switch or something. Consider how you're going to do VPN concentration or your encryption gateways. So moving on to authentication and encryption, encryption with wireless generates the most attention to relationships to the technology. So when you're selecting technology, the authentication and encryption typically is where you spend a lot of time making your decisions. So with that, use the strongest encryption practical. I think, best practice is considered 128 bits today. I know a lot of organizations are going up to 256 and higher. Again, WEP is not considered secure anymore, so everybody's moving to WPA2. And again, most people are using either AES or TKIP. Try to use centralized authentication if you can, or hub and spoke authentication. Select the mechanisms. If you have a PKI certificate authority now, consider using that if you can support that over your wireless. Again, a lot of people are moving to extensible authentication program, EAP. Make sure that if you're doing that, you're up to the newer standards. I think it's RFC 3748 replaces the older one, RFC 2284. That one actually didn't bind the internet or protocols, so you had some man-in-the-middle issues, which the new one kind of mitigates. Actually, it doesn't kind of mitigate; it does mitigate. Use a scheme that allows for mutual authentication, and avoid using any authentication protocols that have been broken. Moving on to some other considerations when you're setting these things up, make sure that you change the default settings. If you've got a new Cisco wireless access point out of the box, make sure you change the default settings. Make sure that you're not broadcasting your SSID. Configure these devices in a non-production facility or non-production mode before you put them into production. This way, people can't see them come up and go, aha, I see what they're doing, and then go on. So if you can, a lot of times, especially in bigger organizations where you have field offices that you're setting these things up at, you can actually configure these things back at the home office and then ship them configured, which makes life a lot easier because the configuration is good when you shipped it. So things like disabling all unused management interfaces, that's standard operating procedure for whether it's wired or wireless. If possible, manage the access points out of band. Again, we talked a little bit last week about using VLANs. Having management VLANs to manage both your wired hubs and your wireless access points and separating that traffic off in its own management space is not a bad idea and consider it a good practice. SSID construction, don't use the name of the company, don't use address, physical location, or other excessive information. Again, because you're not broadcasting the SSID doesn't mean that people aren't going to be able to get it. So the SSID can be attained by attackers. So make sure you use a management scheme or a naming scheme that doesn't give away too much information, but allows you to manage it appropriately. Again, other considerations: logging and monitoring. You want to log events and monitor the health of these wireless access points, and you want to do it in a scheme that is consistent with your wired LANs as well as your supporting, investigative measures for security incidents. Use wireless IDS IPS. There's several tools out there that allow you to do it on the cheap if you don't have a budget for wireless IPS. I would encourage open source if that's your last resort. Institute session timeouts. This is especially important if you have a lot of users in semi-public areas doing kind of hoteling and things like that. Factory floors is a little more difficult. If you have sessions, if you have actual factory automation or control systems that tend to be logged in 24/7, that's a little different. But again, with stuff like that, you should be able to maintain MAC address lists with that gear. Allow for client isolation unless there's a compelling reason otherwise for wireless stations to communicate peer-to-peer. Don't allow them to do it. And I will have more information both from SANS organization, securing wireless and Windows environment, as well as some enterprise and residential wireless checklists. And NIST has some terrific documents on robust security networks for 802.11ni as well as some guides to securing some legacy Inno 211. And there's a lot of that stuff out there. Again, we can't upgrade all our equipment every time there's a new feature or improvement. So sometimes we're stuck with the things that we purchased last year.